"Move my daughter 1 more inch," Grant Holloway said quietly. "And you'd better be ready to explain why the safest room in this hotel is suddenly the most dangerous one." 10 minutes earlier, he had been in the loading bay behind the Whitmore Grand, tightening the zipper on his faded navy jacket while his 8-year-old daughter, Sadie, sat in the back seat of his old Subaru finishing the last bites of a granola bar and asking if he thought rich people ever got nervous. Grant had smiled, checked that her inhaler was in the side pocket of her little backpack, and told her rich people got nervous too. They just paid more money to hide it. Then he helped her out, fixed the cuff of her red sweater, and walked her through the service entrance with one hand on his black equipment case, and the other resting lightly between her shoulders like that small point of contact was the one thing in the world he refused to lose. Inside, the ballroom looked like money trying to impress heaven. Crystal lights spilled over white roses, polished silver, and a stage built for the Whitmore Foundation's annual Children's Gala. Every screen in the room carried the same clean branding, 3 elegant lines of color crossing like they meant safety, trust, order. Sadie slowed down when she saw them. "Dad," she asked softly, "why do they still use your colors?" Grant's hand tightened around the case handle. "Eyes forward, Peanut," he said. "Stay close." He didn't answer, and that alone told her more than words could. They had barely reached the side corridor when the energy in the room changed. Staff straightened. Voices lowered. Naomi Whitmore had arrived. She moved through the ballroom in a black dress and a winter white coat draped over her shoulders, surrounded by executives, donors, and people who smiled too quickly when she looked their way. She didn't scan a room the way most people did. She assessed it, counted it, sorted who mattered from who didn't. Her eyes passed over Grant once, then landed again when Sadie stepped half a foot too close to a roped-off display near the stage. Naomi stopped. "Security," she said, not loudly, but in a tone that made nearby conversations die on contact. "Keep support staff and family members off the VIP floor." Sadie froze. Grant crouched beside her, steady, calm, the kind of calm that only came from a man who had learned panic was a luxury single fathers didn't get to buy. Then he stood, looked past Naomi's flawless posture, past the donors, past the stage lights, and up toward the altered traffic lanes, the narrowed side exit, the decorative partitions that had no business being there. When he spoke, his voice stayed level. "You changed the evacuation flow." Naomi turned fully toward him for the first time. "Excuse me. That center aisle bottleneck's at the south doors now," Grant said. "And the service corridor's been cut in half with floral walls. If anything goes wrong in here, people won't move clean." Naomi's expression barely shifted, but something colder settled into it. She had spent years building a world where authority meant never being corrected by a man in a utility badge. "I don't recall asking for input from the AV crew." Grant glanced at her event map, then at the lighting truss, then back at her. "I'm not AV." "Then whatever you are," she said, "do your job and stay in your lane." Sadie looked up at her father, waiting for the answer that mattered more than any job ever could. Grant didn't raise his voice. He didn't look embarrassed. He just said, "My lane is the part where children make it home safe." For the first time, Naomi noticed the little girl standing beside him, the inhaler clipped to her backpack, the way Grant's body angled toward her even while addressing a threat. But the moment passed. She gave a short nod to security, as if closing a file in her mind. "Keep them behind the line." Then she walked on. Grant watched her go, then lifted his eyes once more to the room she thought she controlled. "Sadie," he murmured, taking her hand, "stay next to me tonight." "Because of her?" she whispered. Grant looked at the stage, the exits, the ceiling, the crowd that would soon fill every polished inch of that ballroom. "No," he said. "Because she just made a mistake she doesn't know is a mistake yet." Grant did not waste another second trying to convince Naomi Whitmore in the middle of her own ballroom. Men like him learned early that some people only heard danger after it. Had already walked into the room wearing a nice suit. He took Sadie by the hand and moved her toward the service corridor, past towers of folded linens, silver carts, and kitchen doors that swung open and shut with bursts of heat and the smell of butter and roasted garlic. Sadie kept pace beside him in her red sweater and white sneakers, her little backpack bumping lightly against her shoulders. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. "Not if we stay sharp," Grant said. He crouched in front of her near a stack of black road cases, and zipped her coat all the way to her chin. You remember the rule? Sadie nodded. If it gets loud, I do not run where everybody runs. I look for you, or I look for an exit sign. Grant gave her the smallest smile. Good girl. Then his phone buzzed with a message from the event operations channel. Stage fog timing had been moved up 12 minutes to match the donor entrance. Another message followed. Decorative partitions had been added along the south corridor for camera framing. Grant exhaled once through his nose. 2 bad choices always became 3 at corporate events, because nobody ever stopped at making one mistake when they could decorate it. He looked back toward the ballroom entrance and saw staff hustling to adjust place cards and lighting cues while the guest count kept climbing. Too many people. Too much fabric. Too many polished surfaces turning a safety plan into a photograph. He opened his equipment case, pulled out a tablet, and brought up the temporary layout file that had been synced to support crews an hour earlier. It was worse than he thought. The center flow had been narrowed by nearly 18 inches, which did not sound like much to people who had never watched a room turn impatient. But Grant knew 18 inches was the difference between order and confusion when families started moving at once. A junior production manager hurried past, arms full of cue sheets. Grant stopped him gently and pointed at the map. Who signed off on this reroute? The young man blinked at him. Executive office. Direct request. Did anyone run a crowd split test after the stage move? I do not know, the man said. I just got told to print the update. Grant let him go. He was used to that answer. 2. No one owned the dangerous decision once it had already climbed the ladder and put on expensive shoes. Sadie leaned against his shoulder for a second, then tipped her head toward the ballroom. Are you going to tell the tall, mean lady again? Grant looked down at her. She is not mean, he said after a moment. She is used to being obeyed fast enough that nobody makes her slow down and think. Sadie considered that. That sounds a little mean. Despite everything, Grant almost laughed. Then he stood, slipped the tablet back into the case, and made up his mind. Keeping quiet might save him from being thrown off the event. It might even save the paycheck he needed. But it would also teach Sadie that adults were supposed to stay polite while preventable mistakes got dressed up as authority. He could not afford to teach her that. So he took her hand again and walked straight back toward the ballroom, where Naomi Whitmore was standing near the stage with her chief of staff and 2 donors, already smiling for cameras, already talking as if the night belonged to her. Grant stopped 3 feet short of the rope line and waited until she noticed him. When she did, her expression cooled on contact. I thought I was clear, she said. You were, Grant replied. That does not make you right. Naomi Whitmore did not like being corrected in public, and she liked it even less by a man wearing a support badge and standing beside a child in white sneakers. The donors closest to her had gone quiet, not because Grant had raised his voice, but because he had not. Calm was always more dangerous in a room full of people who mistook confidence for volume. Naomi turned toward him with the kind of stillness that usually made board members start apologizing before she had said a word. You are out of line, she said. No, Grant answered. Your floor plan is. One of the men beside her gave a quick, uneasy laugh, like he wanted the moment to pass before it became expensive. Naomi did not laugh. I have an operations team, a venue team, and a security team, she said. I do not need a freelance lecture in the middle of my event. Grant held her gaze for one beat, then looked past her shoulder toward the stage. Then ask one of them why your south exit now empties into a decorative choke point. Naomi's chief of staff frowned and glanced toward the back of the room, suddenly less certain than he had been 10 seconds earlier. Naomi caught that flicker, and Grant saw it. She had built her life on reading weakness in a room before anyone else could use it. What unsettled her now was not the challenge. It was the possibility that he knew exactly what he was talking about. Before she could answer, a burst of sharp feedback cracked from a side speaker near the stage. Several guests turned. A waiter stumbled half a step. Grant's eyes moved instantly to the ceiling truss, then to the control booth, then to the center aisle. Naomi noticed. It was fast, almost invisible, but it was not the glance of a technician waiting for instructions. It was the scan of someone measuring reaction time, sight lines, and distance without thinking about it. Who trained you? She asked before she meant to. Grant almost smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Life did most of it. Naomi folded her arms. That is not an answer. It is the one you get tonight. Sadie tugged lightly at Grant's sleeve. Dad. He looked down at once. What is it, Peanut? She pointed toward a black storage trunk positioned near the curtain wall, half hidden behind floral arrangements waiting to be moved. There, under fresh tape and new labels, was an old printed symbol, 3 thin colored lines crossing at an angle. Sadie had seen that mark before in a weathered binder on a shelf above their kitchen desk, next to photos Grant never talked about. That is your sign, she whispered. Naomi heard her. Her eyes shifted from Sadie to Grant, then to the old marking on the trunk. Something changed in her face. Not softness. Not yet. Just recalculation. She turned to her chief of staff. Get me the original vendor archive on the safety package for this event. Full history. He blinked. Now. Grant should have felt some satisfaction at that, but he did not. Being taken seriously 2 minutes before a preventable failure was not victory. It was just late. Naomi looked back at him. Until. I know what game you are playing. You and your daughter stay in the green room. That is not a request. Grant studied her for a moment, then nodded once. Fine, he said. But when this room starts making decisions faster than your ego can, do not look around for someone to blame. Look for me. Naomi did not answer. She motioned toward a staff assistant, who led Grant and Sadie through the side curtain into the green room corridor. It was quieter there, but not calm. People moved with that polished pre-event panic that came from expensive schedules and fragile appearances. Sadie climbed onto a folding chair near a makeup mirror and set her backpack in her lap, while Grant remained standing, listening to the building the way some men listen to weather. 30 seconds later, Naomi stepped into the corridor alone, a slim tablet in her hand and tension sharpened around her mouth. Grant Holloway, she said. Why is your name attached to the first-generation emergency crowd model my company has been using for 6 years? Grant looked at her, then at the tablet, then at Sadie, who was watching both adults with the bright, silent focus children had when they knew the truth had finally entered the room. Grant did not answer Naomi right away. He reached into Sadie's backpack first, pulled out her inhaler, checked the dose counter, and set it on the makeup table beside her little hand like that mattered more than anything written on a corporate archive. Only then did he look at Naomi Whitmore. Because your company bought the system after I built the first version, he said. And because somewhere along the way, somebody decided the cleanest way to sell it was without my name attached. Naomi's eyes stayed on him, sharp and unreadable, but the tablet in her hand lowered half an inch. That file says you were lead design on the original emergency crowd split model. That file is old. It is also real. Grant gave one small nod. So is the flaw in your ballroom. Naomi looked like she wanted to push back, but before she could, a thin ribbon of stage haze slipped under the green room door from the corridor outside. It was light, barely there, but Sadie started. Coughing almost immediately, not hard, just enough for Grant to turn in one motion and kneel beside her chair. Easy, Peanut, he said softly. Slow breath in. Hold it. Good. Sadie tried, but her chest had that tight little rhythm Naomi recognized even before the inhaler was in Grant's hand. Naomi went still. She knew the event notes. She had approved the added atmosphere cues for the donor entrance because one sponsor had insisted the room needed more visual impact for live footage. At the time it had sounded harmless. Polished. Worth the adjustment. Now she was standing 3 feet from a child who could not comfortably fill her lungs because Naomi had signed off on a cosmetic choice. Grant gave Sadie one measured puff, then another after a careful count. He did not look angry. That made it worse. Anger Naomi knew how to meet. Quiet competence under pressure was harder to stand in front of when you were the reason it was needed. Sadie's breathing steadied little by little. Grant stayed crouched until her shoulders relaxed, then rested a hand gently on her knee. You with me? She nodded. I am okay. He smiled at her, though it cost him something. I know you are. Naomi heard herself ask. How sensitive is she? Grant stood slowly. Sensitive enough that decorative smoke should never be drifting into a holding corridor where event staff bring their children. Naomi swallowed once. That effect was approved through executive review. Grant met her eyes. I know. The words landed with more force than blame ever could have. For the first time that evening, Naomi did not feel like the most controlled person in the room. She looked at Sadie, then at the haze still curling near the floor, then back at the file on her screen with Grant Holloway's name buried under years of revisions and legal language. A man she had dismissed in front of donors had designed the safety logic she was relying on tonight, and a decision she had signed had just made his daughter struggle for air. There were mistakes, and then there were moments when the truth stripped the title off your name and left you standing there as only a person. Naomi set the tablet face down on the counter. "If this were my child," she said quietly, almost to herself, "I would shut the room down." Grant held her gaze for a long second. "Then ask yourself," he said, "why you needed my daughter to cough before you were willing to think like a mother instead of a chief executive officer." Naomi did not move for several seconds after Grant said it. In another room, on another night, someone might have apologized fast, the way powerful people often did when they wanted forgiveness to arrive before accountability. But Naomi Whitmore had spent too many years around polished lies to mistake a quick apology for a clean one. She picked up the tablet again and opened deeper archival layers, files that had not been touched in years, internal transfer records, legal summaries, acquisition notes written in the cold language corporations used when they wanted damage to sound efficient. Grant stayed beside Sadie, one hand resting on the back of her chair, while Naomi read in silence. The first thing she found was the original patent draft. His name was there. The second thing she found was worse. A legal memo tied to the acquisition of Sentinel Flow Technologies recommended removing individual attribution from all public-facing safety materials to avoid reopening an insurance dispute connected to the crowd incident that had ended Grant's career there. Naomi read that line twice. Then a third time. "Insurance dispute," she repeated, but the words sounded thin even to her. Grant looked past her shoulder at nothing. "That is one way to say my wife never came home from a public event that should have been managed better." Naomi lifted her eyes. For the first time all evening, she saw not just a calm man with a child and a tool case, but the outline of the life behind him. Not theory, not resilience as a corporate slogan. Real cost, real years. Sadie sat quietly, tracing a finger over the strap of her backpack, old enough to recognize the edge in grown-up voices, young enough to still hope truth could fix what it exposed. Naomi kept reading. Grant had not walked away because he failed. He had walked away because every interview after the incident wanted his expertise, while none of them wanted his grief. He had built safer models, watched larger companies buy them, and then watched those same companies smooth the human fingerprints off the work until only branding remained. She looked down at the three-line symbol on the old file header and suddenly understood why Sadie had recognized it. It had not been company property first. It had been his. "Did you ever challenge it?" Naomi asked quietly. Grant gave a tired half-smile. "I was raising a 3-year-old girl who cried whenever I put on a tie because she thought ties meant I was leaving again. I chose where to spend my energy." Naomi felt that answer land harder than any accusation. She had spent her life admiring sacrifice when it wore ambition, but she had never respected sacrifice when it wore ordinary clothes and carried a lunchbox and an inhaler. That realization sat in her chest like a stone. Outside the green room, the music swelled as guests took their seats. The gala was starting. Naomi looked toward the door, then back at Grant. "I can stop the event now," she said. Grant shook his head once. "Not without causing the exact confusion I warned you about. Too many people are already in the room. If you shut it down wrong, they all move at once." Naomi stared at him. "So what do you want me to do?" Grant answered immediately. "Tell me who has override on lighting, fog, door timing, and floor staff routing. Then stop making this about who gets credit, and start making it about who gets home." Naomi drew in a slow breath. In the ballroom beyond the door, a wave of applause rose as her name was announced. Her night, her event, her donors, her stage. But none of it sounded the same anymore. She turned off her tablet, slipped it under her arm, and looked directly at the man she had treated like background. "All right," she said. "Tell me where the room breaks first." Grant stepped to the green room door and listened for 3 seconds, which was all he needed. Years ago, he had learned that rooms told the truth faster than people did. The applause in the ballroom sounded wrong now. Too stretched. Too delayed at the edges. It meant the center was filling faster than the perimeter, which meant the narrowed aisle was already changing how people moved without anyone noticing. He looked back at Naomi. "First break happens at the south corridor when your donor line backs up against the family seating section," he said. "Second break happens when stage fog hits before the room has settled. People will hesitate because they cannot see clean sight lines. Hesitation is where confusion starts. Naomi had already pulled out her phone. Darren, she said to her chief of staff the second he answered. I need override authority confirmed on lighting, atmospheric effects, and ballroom door timing right now. And nobody touches a floor plan change without my voice on the line. She ended the call and looked at Grant. What else? Grant was already moving. He picked up a spare radio from a charging cradle, checked the battery, and handed Naomi a second one. What you do next decides whether this becomes a correction or a chain reaction, he said. Tell your announcer to hold the sponsor in trance for 2 minutes. Kill the second fog cue. Open the service corridor and remove those floral partitions immediately. Naomi pressed the transmit button without hesitation now. Her tone changed. It was still controlled, still sharp, but it had lost that polished distance she wore when she thought the room existed to obey her. This is Naomi Whitmore. Hold donor walk-in. Repeat. Hold donor walk-in. Disable secondary haze cue. Open service corridor south side. Remove visual barriers now. Through the wall, the ballroom music swelled as her pre-recorded introduction began anyway. Someone had missed the update. Grant closed his eyes for half a second. Too late, he said. Then the first sign hit. Not panic. Not chaos. Something smaller and more dangerous because people ignored it until it multiplied. A cluster near the center aisle stalled. Another group behind them kept moving. A server with a tray stepped sideways to avoid a child. A photographer drifted into the narrowed lane for a better angle. The room did what badly designed rooms always did. It started making small selfish decisions all at once. Grant was already in motion. Sadie, stay with Miss Carla, he said, pointing to the makeup assistant nearest the chair. Do not move unless I come get you. Sadie looked up at him, serious now, her small face pale but steady. I know the rule. Grant touched her shoulder once, then stepped into the corridor with Naomi at his side. She caught up with him. In 3 quick strides. Tell me exactly where you need me. He glanced at her, measuring. 10 minutes earlier, she had been a liability in heels. Now she was trying to become useful. You need to be seen, he said. Not admired. Not introduced. Seen. Go to the ballroom edge, stop smiling, and start redirecting people before they think they are being redirected. Naomi gave a single nod and moved. Grant cut the other way, radio in hand, eyes scanning exits, staff posture, ceiling vents, and the slow roll of white haze beginning to slip across the lights like a lie finally getting comfortable. Then a distorted chime cracked through the speaker system, followed by a half-triggered alarm tone that should never have gone live during an occupied event. Naomi stopped cold at the ballroom entrance and looked back at Grant. He did not need to raise his voice. If we split this room late, he said, the children get pushed to the wrong side first. Naomi moved to the ballroom edge exactly as Grant told her to, and for the first time that night, people did not look at her like a symbol. They looked at her like a signal. She stepped in front of a cluster of donors near the center aisle, lowered her voice, and redirected them toward the east side with the kind of calm that kept embarrassment from turning into resistance. Across the room, Grant was already doing 3 things at once. He cut the side lighting over the narrowed corridor so people would stop drifting toward the prettier path, told a pair of floor managers to open the service route fully, and shifted a family group away from the south choke point before they even realized they had been in one. It was not dramatic. That was why it worked. Real control almost never looked like theater. It looked like a man noticing which way shoulders turned before feet followed. The half-triggered alarm tone died, but the damage was already in motion. Guests were standing too close together now, pausing at the wrong times, glancing upward instead of outward. Fog curled low across the stage lights, turning the room softer, stranger, less certain. Grant grabbed a radio. Housekeeping team at South Partition, pull every decorative panel now. Do not ask permission twice. A voice crackled back that the florist was objecting because the installation belonged to a donor package. Grant did not slow down. Then tell the donor their flowers can sue me later. Naomi heard that through her own radio and almost felt something impossible at a time like this. Respect. Not because he was saving her event, but because he had no spare energy left for pretending status mattered more than safety. Then she looked toward the green room corridor to check on Sadie, and her stomach dropped. The folding chair by the makeup mirror was empty. Naomi crossed the threshold in 4 fast steps. The makeup assistant looked up, pale and shaken. She was right here, the woman said. She said she saw something fall out of her father's pocket, and she just ran toward the side hall. Naomi did not waste 1 second on blame. Which side hall? West Service Lane, near the old storage alcove. Naomi turned at once and found Grant through the open ballroom doors. He was in the middle of rerouting a line of guests with one hand raised and a voice steady enough to keep strangers listening. She did not call his name across the room. She went straight to him, close enough that only he could hear her. Sadie is not in the green room. Everything in Grant's face changed, but nothing in him broke. He gave 2 final instructions into the radio, handed it to a floor captain, and looked directly at Naomi. How long? Less than a minute. Why did she leave? Naomi swallowed once. She went after something that fell from your pocket. Grant's hand went to his jacket automatically. Empty. His wallet-sized photo sleeve was gone. For 1 second, just one, Naomi saw what he had probably spent years hiding from the world. Not fear for himself, but fear of what one wrong minute could cost a child who trusted him completely. Then he was moving. Naomi kept pace beside him through the West Service Lane, past stacked banquet chairs and dim utility lights, until they saw Sadie at the far end of the corridor, kneeling beside a fallen photo sleeve on the carpet, her small fingers gathering pictures that had slipped loose. One photo showed a smiling woman in a denim jacket, wind in her hair, standing beside a younger Grant with one hand over a small pregnant belly. Sadie looked up as they reached her. Then she looked at Naomi, then back at the picture, and asked in a soft, clear voice that landed harder than the alarm ever had. If you knew he built the thing that keeps everyone safe, why did you talk to him like he was nobody? Naomi did not answer Sadie right away, and that silence told more truth than any polished statement ever could. The little girl was still kneeling on the carpet, one hand on the fallen photo sleeve, her red sweater bright against the dim service hallway, while Grant bent down and gently gathered the pictures that had slipped free. He did not rush Sadie. He did not rush Naomi either. He just picked up the last photo, slid it back into the sleeve, and stood with that same quiet control that had held the entire ballroom together when everything else had started to drift. Naomi looked at the picture in his hand one last time. The woman in it was young, laughing, alive in the easy way people only looked before life taught them what it could take. Naomi felt the answer rise in her throat, but it came out stripped of all the armor she had worn that night. Because I saw the badge before I saw the man, she said. Sadie's eyes stayed on her. Children had a way of waiting for the part adults usually try to escape. Naomi drew in a breath. And because I let a system teach me that the person closest to the floor must know less than the person closest to the stage. Grant looked at her then, really looked at her, and what passed through his face was not forgiveness. Not even close. It was recognition. She had finally said it plain. No spin. No corporate gloss. Just the ugly shape of the truth standing in the hall between them. Over the radio clipped to Naomi's coat, a floor manager's voice broke in, tense and fast. The south partition was down. Families were moving clean again. The donor lane had been rerouted. The room was stabilizing. Grant reached for the radio, listened, then handed it back without a word. Naomi took it and straightened slowly. The ballroom still needed a visible center, and for once she understood that being visible was not the same thing as being important. I need to make a statement, she said. Grant's eyes shifted toward the ballroom doors. Then make a true one. Naomi nodded once and turned toward the stage. This time when she walked, she did not look like a woman entering her empire. She looked like someone about to step into the cost of her own decisions. Grant crouched beside Sadie and adjusted the strap on her backpack. You stay with me now, he said softly. Sadie glanced toward Naomi's retreating figure. Is she in trouble? Grant looked at the ballroom, where applause was beginning again, thinner now, uncertain. Yes, he said, but not the kind people can fix with a press release. Together, he and Sadie followed at a distance until they reached the edge of the ballroom. Naomi Whitmore stepped onto the side stage, took the microphone from her startled host, and stopped the room without raising her voice. The music cut. Conversations thinned. The donors turned. The board members straightened in their chairs. Naomi did not smile. Before this evening continues, she said, there is something this room needs to hear from me directly. Grant stood near the back with Sadie's hand folded into his. He could feel the entire room leaning toward her. Naomi's gaze swept the crowd, then found Grant for the briefest second before she faced everyone again. Tonight, A serious operational failure was prevented by a man my company should have honored years ago, instead of burying under legal language and convenience. His name is Grant Holloway. The silence that followed felt larger than the ballroom itself. Naomi kept going. The emergency system this foundation depends on was built from his work. His name was removed long before I stood on this stage, but I continued benefiting from that silence. And tonight, I repeated that failure in person. No one moved. No one knew where to look first. At Naomi. At Grant. At one another. She did not let them off the hook. This event is being formally paused. An internal review begins tonight. Attribution records will be opened, and any success attached to this foundation will no longer stand on work taken from the people who built it. Sadie looked up at her father. She said your name right. Grant. Swallowed once, eyes still fixed on Naomi. Yes, he said quietly. She did. But even as the room absorbed the truth, even as donors shifted and board members stared and staff looked at him with sudden recognition, Grant felt no victory yet. Because public truth was one thing. What came after it was another. And from the way Naomi stood alone under those white lights, with the whole cost of honesty just beginning to arrive, he knew the night was not done with either of them. A week later, the Whitmore Foundation looked the same from the street, all glass and winter light. But inside, everything had shifted just enough for people to stop trusting the floor beneath them. News had not broken publicly yet, but lawyers had arrived early. Board members were suddenly asking careful questions, and a locked archive had been reopened under Naomi Whitmore's direct order. Grant Holloway knew because an envelope had shown up at his apartment that morning by courier, thick cream paper, no logo on the front, only his full name in neat black type. Inside was a letter from outside counsel confirming that the company was prepared to restore formal attribution on the original emergency model, release internal acquisition records, and begin settlement discussions tied to intellectual ownership and reputational damages. There was also a handwritten note from Naomi on a plain white card. It said only, I am opening the files tomorrow. I will not hide behind legal timing again. I need to know whether I should keep going, even if it drags your name back into every room you worked so hard to leave. Grant read it twice at the kitchen counter while Sadie ate cinnamon waffles and socks, and asked if famous people ever got tired of being wrong in expensive buildings. He almost smiled at that, but the weight in his chest stayed where it was. Because this was the part no one ever clapped for. Not the rescue. Not the public admission. The part after, when truth came with invoices, headlines, depositions, old interviews, and strangers digging through the worst year of your life like they had bought tickets to it. Sadie slid off her chair and walked over with syrup still on her thumb. Is she the lady who said, your name right? She asked. Grant nodded. Yes. Sadie looked at the letter, then up at him. If telling the truth makes everything loud again, is it still the right thing? Grant did not answer right away. Through the apartment window, the morning looked ordinary. A mail truck. A barking dog. A dad across the street scraping frost off a windshield. The kind of morning he had spent years protecting for his daughter, one quiet routine at a time. His phone lit up then. Naomi again. No long message this time. Just 6 words. If you say stop, I will. Grant stared at the screen while Sadie waited beside him, small and patient, and watching him the way children watch adults when they know the next sentence might shape more than one life. He could protect her peace. He could bury the past one more time. Or he could let the truth tear open every sealed room and trust that some things were worth the noise they made. He looked at his daughter, then at the message, then back at the envelope on the counter. And that is the question I cannot answer for him. If you were Grant, would you expose everything and risk dragging your child back through the fire just to reclaim the truth? Or would you protect the quiet life you built and let the woman who humiliated you carry that guilt alone? And if you were Naomi, would you keep opening those files even if the man you wronged asked you not to?